I thought my biggest problem was being late for my shift at the ER, until a woman I'd never seen before collapsed at my feet, clutching my arm so tight it hurt, sobbing through trembling lips. "My God, Madison, they said you were dead 28 years ago." The hallway smelled of antiseptic and coffee gone cold. Nurses rushed past, sneakers squeaking on polished floors. The bright lights overhead buzzed like angry wasps drilling into my skull. For a second I wondered if this was one of those dreams that left you sweating in bed, tangled in sheets, heart pounding like a war drum. But the woman's tears soaked into my scrubs warm and real. I tried to pull away, mumbling apologies, but she wouldn't let go. Her eyes, gray, stormy, rimmed with red, were locked on mine with a desperation that made the hairs on my arms stand up. She smelled faintly of lavender lotion and rain-damp wool. I could feel her nails biting into my skin as she whispered my name again. Not the name I'd used all my life, but one I'd never heard spoken aloud. "Madison Rose Hale." I blinked. My throat tightened. My pulse roared in my ears so loud I barely heard the beeping monitors and soft overhead voice paging Dr. Patel to Trauma Bay 3. That name meant nothing to me. Or maybe it did. Because as soon as she said it, something shifted deep in my chest. A distant echo. A fragment of something lost. A flash of a merry-go-round spinning under a canopy of green trees. A man's laughter. A pink dress with polka dots. But then it was gone, like smoke whisked away by the hospital air vents. "Ma'am, I'm sorry," I said, voice trembling. "My name is Olivia Monroe. You must have me confused with someone else." But she shook her head so violently, wisps of silver hair flew free from her bun. "No, no, it's you. The eyes, the nose, even that tiny scar above your eyebrow." Her fingers darted up to touch the faint line just beneath my hairline. I flinched back, stunned that she knew about the scar I'd gotten falling off my bike at 7, or so my mother always said. I stared at her. My mouth opened, but nothing came out. Everything around me felt like it was tilting sideways, the clatter of a gurney slamming through double doors, the shrill cries of a baby echoing down the corridor, the smell of blood and bleach. My vision blurred for a second. I felt as though I might throw up. She clutched a pendant around her neck, her voice dropping to a raw whisper. "They told us you were gone, that we'd never find you. But here you are, alive. Madison." Her words slammed into me like a car crash. I stumbled backward, nearly colliding with a passing orderly. "Alive, Madison, 28 years ago." My tongue felt numb as I rasped, I don't know what you're talking about." But even as I said it, a cold shiver coiled around my spine. Because somewhere deep inside, a small voice was whispering that maybe, just maybe, this stranger knew something about me I'd never dared imagine. "My name is Olivia Monroe. Or at least that's what I've believed my entire life. My name, the name I've carried like a badge and a shield for as long as I can remember, is Olivia Monroe. I'm 33 years old, and for most of my life I thought I knew exactly who I was. I'm an ER nurse at Boston Medical Center, the kind of place where alarms shriek at all hours, where blood pressure readings can flip a quiet night into chaos, and where you learn fast to keep a calm face, no matter how your stomach knots inside. My shifts are brutal, but I love it. There's something raw and immediate about the ER, the way strangers trust you with the worst day of their lives. The adrenaline. The moments when you pull someone back from the brink and see a flicker of gratitude in their eyes. Outside the hospital, my life is pretty ordinary, or it used to be. I live alone in a small, brick-walled apartment on Tremont Street, 3 stories up from a bakery that starts wafting cinnamon and yeast into my windows before dawn. There's a window that never quite shuts right, so in winter, icy winds sneak in and rattle the blinds. I've decorated the place with second-hand furniture and thrift store art. There's a slightly crooked shelf lined with nursing textbooks, a battered gray couch that belonged to my college roommate, and a handful of spider plants I keep forgetting to water. Every morning I wake up to the rhythm of Boston outside my window, honking horns, the whoosh of buses, the soft hush of snow when winter wraps the city in silence. I stumble into my tiny kitchen and brew a pot of dark coffee so strong it could probably strip paint. I'm addicted to iced coffee even when the snow piles knee-high on the sidewalks. My parents, James and Ellen Monroe, still live in the house where they raised me in Quincy, just outside Boston. My mother texts me every other hour reminders to eat, to sleep, to call home. She sends me silly gifs of dancing cats or memes about nurse life. My father, quieter but no less loving, calls me Livy and insists on checking my car's oil level every time I visit. Growing up, I always believed I'd been born to them, loved by them. Our family albums start when I'm 3 years old, my hair in messy pigtails, chocolate cake smeared across my face at a birthday party, my parents smiling proudly beside me. Mom always said a fire destroyed everything from before then. I never questioned it. Why would I? My friends say I'm strong-driven and a little stubborn. They're not wrong. My best friend Sarah, who I met during nursing school, calls me the human lie detector because I can spot a fib at 20 paces. She's a dental hygienist with a laugh that could shatter glass and a heart big enough to rescue every stray animal in Boston. Will, another close friend, is a paramedic who's saved my butt countless times in the ER. He's got dark hair, quick hands, and a sarcastic humor that hides how fiercely he cares. My days are filled with the kind of chaos that only makes sense to healthcare workers. Long hours, short tempers, the hum of fluorescent lights, the snap of latex gloves. I've comforted strangers as they cried over loved ones. I've raced down hallways with crash carts. I've stitched wounds, drawn blood-pushed meds, and stood silent as monitors flatlined. And yet, despite all the drama of my job, my personal life has always felt normal, predictable. I like to think I'm the kind of person who knows herself, who can handle whatever life throws her way. Or, at least I did, until the day that woman looked at me and called me Madison Rose Hale. Now I lie awake at night staring at the ceiling fan spinning shadows across my walls, wondering how well any of us truly know who we are. Wondering if the life I've built, the one I've fought for, is balanced on secrets I can't even begin to understand. It was a Monday afternoon that smelled of rain and disinfectant, a sky hanging low and heavy over Boston like a lead blanket. I'd just finished giving report on a patient when the call came over the intercom, an older female syncopal episode incoming through the ambulance bay. I pushed open the metal doors to the ER just as the EMTs wheeled in a woman slumped on a stretcher. Her face was pale, dotted with rain-silver hair plastered to her temples. She was muttering words no one seemed to understand. The moment our eyes met, she lurched up on the stretcher, gasping. Her hand shot out, fingers like claws grabbing the sleeve of my scrubs. "Madison," she choked out, her voice raw. "My God, you're alive!" A wave of confusion crashed over me so hard I almost staggered backward. "Ma'am, you're in the hospital," I said gently, trying to pry her fingers off my arm. "I'm Olivia Monroe." "Do you know where you are?" But her eyes filled with tears, wide and desperate. She ignored the monitors beeping around us, the swirl of nurses and paramedics moving equipment and IV bags. You have her eyes," she whispered. "The same green, with gold flecks. The same little scar." She reached out trembling and brushed her thumb over my eyebrow. I recoiled. "How do you know about my scar?" I demanded, suddenly breathless. "Because Madison got that scar when she was 4. Fell off the jungle gym in Franklin Park," she said, her voice splintering. 3 stitches, right above her eyebrow. The room felt too small, too bright. My heart hammered against my ribs like it wanted out. "That's impossible," I said, shaking my head. "My name is Olivia. I've never been to Franklin Park." Her eyes brimmed, lashes wet and trembling. "You have a star-shaped birthmark on your left shoulder, don't you?" I blinked so hard my vision blurred. For a moment the noises around me faded into a dull roar. That birthmark. No one outside my family knew about it. A tiny star nestled near my shoulder blade. Mom used to say it was my lucky mark. My college boyfriend had called it my shooting star. "I think you're confusing me with someone else," I said, though my voice cracked like dry paper. The woman still gripping my sleeve sucked in a trembling breath. "My name is Carol Matthews," she said. "My sister was your mother, your real mother. Madison Rose Hale is my niece. You disappeared 28 years ago." I felt my blood run cold, a chill racing through every nerve. "That's not true," I whispered. My parents are James and Ellen Monroe. I've always been Olivia. She let out a strangled sob, her hand falling away from my arm. You were only 5 when you vanished, right out of your backyard. You loved pink dresses, you hated peanut butter, and you couldn't sleep without your stuffed rabbit Mr. Buttons. A memory flickered so quickly it was gone before I could catch it. A soft gray rabbit, floppy ears, a name whispered in a child's voice. I shook my head violently, fighting off the rush of panic that clawed at my chest. I don't remember any of that. Carol opened her purse with trembling hands, rifling through tissues and receipts until she pulled out a small, worn photograph. She held it out to me. Look at this. I hesitated, then took it with shaking fingers. It was a photo of a little girl in a pink sundress standing in a yard scattered with autumn leaves. Her hair was the same dark chestnut as mine. She was missing 2 front teeth, grinning up at the camera. Her eyes, green flecked with gold, were my eyes. It felt like the floor dropped out from under me. I've never seen this photo before. Carol's tears spilled over. I've been looking for you for almost 3 decades, she said, voice quivering. Don't you understand? You're Madison. You're my family. My breath came in short, sharp gasps. The photo slipped from my hand, fluttering to the linoleum. All I could think was that my entire life had just cracked open, and something I didn't even know was buried was about to come pouring out. The sound of my own footsteps echoed off the corridor walls as I walked away from Carol, the memory of her tears still burning into my skin like acid. I shoved open the staff lounge door, stumbling inside, my mind a blur. I sat on the edge of the sofa, fingers tangled in my hair, trying to breathe. How could a stranger know the scar above my brow, or the exact shape of the star on my shoulder? Madison Rose Hale. I tried to say the name under my breath, but it felt foreign, like a word in a language I didn't speak. When my shift finally ended, I barely remembered clocking out. Rain pelted the windshield of my old Honda Civic as I sat staring at the steering wheel, Carol's voice echoing in my skull. I called Sarah the moment I pulled away from the hospital parking lot. "Liv, what's wrong?" she asked. Her voice, usually bright, went tight with concern. I think someone mistook me for a girl who went missing. She knew things about me, things no stranger could possibly know. Slow down? What do you mean? I told her everything, my words tumbling over each other so fast I could hardly breathe. About the scar, the birthmark, the photograph of the little girl who looked exactly like me. Sarah fell silent. Liv, that's insane. I know, my voice cracked. But what if she's right? What if my whole life isn't even mine? Okay, let's not jump to conclusions. Maybe you just resemble this girl. But she knew about the scar and the rabbit, Mr. Buttons. Sarah inhaled sharply. You've never told me about a Mr. Buttons. That's because I don't even remember owning a rabbit, I whispered. I hung up my chest tight. When I got home, my apartment felt colder than usual. The shadows stretched longer across the brick walls. I flipped on the lights, dropped my bag on the couch, and stared at the framed photos perched on my shelves. All of them started around age 3, birthday parties, first day of kindergarten, Christmas mornings in matching pajamas. I pulled the oldest album off the shelf. My mother's neat handwriting curled across the cover, Olivia, early years. Page after page there, I was a child with the same dark chestnut hair, the same green eyes. 3 years old, blowing out candles. 4, hugging a stuffed giraffe. 5, clutching my parents' hands at a beach. Nothing earlier, no baby photos, no toddler pictures. A cold shiver slid down my spine. I called my mother. It rang twice before she answered, her voice warm and familiar. "Hi, sweetie, how's my favorite nurse?" "Mom," my voice came out hoarse. "Why don't we have any pictures of me as a baby?" Silence hummed at the other end of the line. "Mom," I pushed, swallowing hard. She cleared her throat. "Oh, honey, but we've talked about this. The fire. Remember we lost everything before you turned 3. I closed my eyes. "But where did we live before Boston?" "What was our address?" "Oh, I can't recall the exact address, darling. It was so long ago." "You remember everything, Mom. You keep receipts from my prom dress. You still remember the name of my pediatrician. Why can't you remember our address?" Her voice wobbled. "Livy, why are you asking all this?" I hesitated. Then I whispered, "Did you and Dad adopt me?" A sharp inhale on the other end. Olivia, please, don't do this. You're our daughter. That's all that matters. My fingers tightened around the phone until they ached. But am I? Madison Rose Hale. A strangled sob slipped out before my mother hung up. The dial tone droned in my ear like a distant scream. My chest felt crushed. My thoughts tangled and churned like a whirlpool. I spent the next hours digging through every drawer, every file box, every cardboard bin under my bed, searching for something, anything, a clue. And then under a pile of old birthday cards, I found an envelope yellowed with age. Inside was a certificate, my birth certificate. My breath caught in my throat as I read the name typed across the top. Madison Rose Hale. Date of birth June 12, 1990. Mother Catherine Hale. Father unknown. My knees gave out and I sank onto the floor, the certificate crumpling in my shaking hands. Everything blurred. 100 memories seemed to fracture in my skull. Who the hell was I? I called Sarah back. My voice shook so badly I could barely form the words. I found a birth certificate with a different name. Madison Rose Hale. Sarah let out a low whistle. Liv, this just got real. You have to talk to this woman again. Get a DNA test. Find out the truth. I stared at the certificate, my pulse thudding. Somewhere inside, something fragile cracked open. And a part of me whispered that maybe I was about to unravel the only life I'd ever known. The rain poured down in thick silver sheets as I sat in my car outside the cafe on Boylston Street, windshield wipers screeching back and forth. My reflection stared back at me in the glass, a face I thought I knew, but suddenly wasn't sure belonged to me at all. I could barely feel my fingers as I gripped the steering wheel. My stomach was a tangled knot. Part of me wanted to drive away, pretend none of this had ever happened. But the name on that birth certificate kept blazing in my mind like a neon sign. Madison Rose Hale. I pushed the door open and stumbled inside. The bell above the door jingled. The smell of roasted coffee beans and rain-damp coats hit me all at once. Carol was already there, sitting at a corner table. She looked smaller than I remembered, hunched into a navy cardigan, eyes ringed with exhaustion. Her hands twisted around a paper cup so hard it crinkled. When she saw me, relief flooded her face, mingled with fear. Olivia? Or Madison? She said softly, like she didn't dare settle on either name. I dropped into the seat across from her, my chair screeching against the tile. My voice came out raw. I found a birth certificate. My name on it, as Madison, and your sister's name listed as my mother. Carol's breath caught. Her eyes shimmered with unshed tears. I knew it, she whispered. I've known it since the second I saw you. Why didn't you ever find me sooner? I demanded, anger surging through the fear like a live wire. If I've been alive all this time, how did no one find me? Carol's voice cracked. Because we didn't know where to look. The police thought maybe you'd drowned, or been taken out of state. You were so little. And then your mother, my sister, she died of cancer 2 years after you vanished. She never stopped hoping. A lump rose in my throat, thick and painful. I don't remember any of this, I rasped. Not her, not you, nothing. Carol pulled her tote bag into her lap and unzipped it, carefully removing a small battered photo album. She laid it gently on the table and flipped it open. This was your 5th birthday, she said. We had a party at Franklin Park. You insisted on pink balloons. You loved pink. I stared down at a photo of a little girl with dark chestnut hair tied in pigtails, grinning so wide her eyes crinkled. She wore a pink dress sprinkled with tiny white stars. It was like staring into a mirror that reflected a version of me frozen in time. I felt a sharp pang of something I couldn't name. This doesn't prove anything, I whispered, my voice shaking. Carol flipped another page. And this was you with your mother, Catherine. She was my baby sister. You two were inseparable. The woman in the photo had soft features, a gentle smile, and eyes identical to my own. She held the little girl against her hip, laughing. A sob wrenched out of me before I could stop it. Carol's hand darted out and wrapped around mine. Her fingers were cool and trembling. I don't expect you to remember right away, she said. But I need you to know how hard we searched. We hung flyers, we talked to reporters, we even hired private investigators. We never gave up. Tears spilled down my cheeks, blurring the photos. Why didn't the Monroes ever tell me any of this? Carol swallowed hard. Maybe they believed you were better off not knowing. Maybe they loved you enough to convince themselves it was the right thing. But Olivia, you were stolen from us. My entire chest felt like it was caving in. I thought I knew who I was, I whispered. I thought I had parents who loved me. A life that made sense. Carol reached into her tote once more, pulling out a small velvet pouch. She loosened the drawstrings and spilled the contents into her palm, a tiny silver charm shaped like a star, scratched and worn. "This was yours," she said. "Your mother gave it to you on your 4th birthday. You wore it every day." I lifted trembling fingers toward the charm. The sight of it triggered something deep and electric, a fleeting memory of my small fingers clutching silver, my mother's voice, saying, "My little star." My breath caught in my throat. Carol held out a plastic baggie. Inside was a DNA test kit. "I already took mine," she said softly. "If you're willing, we can finally know for sure." I stared at the kit, my heart slamming against my ribs. I could hear the storm raging outside, rain hammering the windows like an angry drum. My voice was barely a whisper. "I don't know if I'm ready for this." Carol squeezed my hand. "The truth doesn't wait until we're ready," she said. "But it's still the truth." A sob bubbled up in my chest as I took the kit from her. My fingers trembled as I broke the seal, swabbing the inside of my cheek, sealing it into the tube. Somewhere deep in my gut, I knew there was no going back. I set the kit on the table. Carol stared at it like it was holy. Outside, the rain eased for a moment, the hush almost deafening. I whispered, "If this is true, everything I believed about my life is a lie." Carol wiped her eyes, voice shaking. "Not a lie. Just a story you didn't have all the pages to yet." I sat there staring at the woman who might be my aunt as thunder rumbled far away, and I wondered if my entire life had been built on someone else's heartbreak. 10 days felt like a lifetime. Every second I checked my email, my hands clammy, my heart leaping into my throat at every notification. Each time it was just bills, hospital updates, spam offers for credit cards I didn't want, until finally, there it was. Subject: DNA results. Urgent. My finger hovered over the mouse, trembling. I was alone in my apartment, rain tapping at the windows, Boston skyline ghostly behind the glass. My breath rattled in my chest as I clicked. Probability of relationship, 99.99% match. Carol Matthews is your biological maternal aunt. My eyes blurred so fast I almost couldn't read the words. My entire body went cold, then hot waves crashing over me, leaving me gasping for air. I felt my knees buckle. I sank to the floor beside my couch, the laptop sliding off the coffee table. Madison Rose Hale. That was me. I wasn't Olivia Monroe born to James and Ellen Monroe. I was a child who vanished from a backyard 28 years ago, leaving behind a family who'd torn the world apart trying to find me. I pressed my palm to my chest, trying to calm the thunder of my heartbeat. Images flashed in my mind, fleeting like flickers of old film. A merry-go-round, a woman with chestnut hair singing softly, a pink dress spinning in the sun. And then, darkness. My phone buzzed in my pocket. It was Sarah. "Liv, did you get the email?" I swallowed, trying to make my voice work. "Yeah, I got it." "Oh my God," she breathed. "So it's true, you're Madison." Tears poured down my face, silent and relentless. "I don't even know who I am anymore," I choked out. "Everything I've believed my whole life, my name, my family, it's all built on a lie." Sarah was crying too, her voice soft and shaky. "Liv, or Maddie, you're still you. You're still the person who held my hair back when I puked at your 21st birthday. You're the person who saves people every day. None of that changes, but it did change. It changed everything. Because now I had questions I didn't even know how to ask. Why had my parents hidden this from me? Why had they stolen someone else's child? And who was I really, a woman named Olivia Monroe, or a ghost called Madison Hale? I stayed on the floor for what felt like hours, staring into space, the rain drumming like a heartbeat. Finally, I wiped my face and pulled my phone closer. I opened the email again, reading every word, letting it sear into my mind. Then I called Carol. She answered on the first ring, voice trembling. "I saw the results," she said. I knew it was you." And for the first time, even though my world was crumbling, I felt something else crack through the fear. A tiny glimmer of belonging. because somewhere out there was a family who had never stopped waiting for me. Sunday afternoon sun spilled through the windows of my parents' house in Quincy, catching on the framed photos lining the hallway walls. Pictures of me grinning in Halloween costumes, wearing a soccer uniform, hugging stuffed animals I didn't remember owning. I stood in the doorway of the living room, the DNA report clutched so tightly in my hand that the paper crumpled around my fingers. My breath came short and sharp. My parents, James and Ellen Monroe, sat on the beige couch side by side, fingers intertwined like they were bracing themselves against a storm. Mom looked up first, her eyes lighting with a smile that faltered when she saw my face. "Livy, what's wrong, sweetheart?" I tried to speak, but my voice caught. I swallowed hard and held out the papers. I got the DNA results. Dad's shoulders slumped. Mom's hand flew to her mouth, stifling a tiny gasp. "Oh, Olivia," Mom whispered, tears already filling her eyes. We were hoping it wasn't true." My voice came out ragged, trembling. "So it's true I'm not Olivia Monroe. I'm Madison Rose Hale." Dad lowered his gaze. His voice was gravelly, barely above a whisper. "We never wanted to hurt you." "Hurt me!" My voice rose, cracking on the edge of hysteria. "You stole me!" Mom sobbed, reaching for me, but I flinched away. "We didn't steal you," she cried. We thought we were saving you. Saving me from what?" I shot back. "From my real family. From a mother who died believing I was gone." Mom buried her face in her hands, shoulders shaking. Dad sat frozen eyes staring at a distant spot on the wall. He finally spoke, his words slow and raw. "We tried for years to have children. Your mother had 3 miscarriages. Adoption after adoption fell through. We were desperate. And then, Mark, my cousin, called us one night. Said he knew a woman who had a child who needed a home. He told us the child's mother was a drug addict, that she'd disappeared and no one wanted the kid." My heart thudded so hard I could hear it in my ears. "So you just... what bought me?" Mom let out a low moan. "We didn't pay exactly. We gave Mark some money to help the mother get on her feet. We didn't ask questions we didn't want the answers to." "Oh my God!" I screamed, my voice echoing off the walls. "You knew there was something wrong with this. That's why you changed your names. That's why you never told me anything about before Boston." Mom's sobs came harder now, her words tumbling out. "Please, Livy, please try to understand. We loved you. We gave you everything we could. You were our whole world." Tears stung my eyes. "But you kept me from my real family," I whispered, my voice shaking. "You let them believe I was dead." Dad wiped his face roughly, his eyes red. We thought we were giving you a better life, and we were terrified the truth would take you away from us." The weight of betrayal pressed on my chest so heavy I thought it might crush me. How many times I hissed, "Did you see my face on those missing children posters? How many times did you turn off the news when my story came on?" Mom collapsed into sobs again. Every time we were afraid someone would recognize you. We avoided the news. We kept to ourselves. We were ashamed. A silence settled over the room so thick it felt like drowning. Finally, Dad's voice cracked as he whispered, "We know we did wrong. We deserve whatever happens now." I stared at the people who'd raised me, the people who'd kissed, scraped knees, stayed up with me through fevers, cheered at my graduations. The people who had also kept me from the family who'd spent decades searching for me. My chest felt torn open. "I don't want you in prison," I whispered, voice breaking. "But I don't know if I can ever forgive you." Mom's face crumpled. "We'll do anything, Livy. Therapy, answers, anything." Tears blurred my vision. My voice came out like shattered glass. "I'm not Livy, I'm Madison. And I need time to figure out who that even is." Mom sobbed into her hands. Dad squeezed her shoulder, staring down at the floor. I turned away, the DNA results still clutched in my trembling fingers, and walked out into the pale winter sunlight, unsure if I'd ever feel like anyone's daughter again. The sky over Boston was brilliant blue the first time I drove to Carol's house as Madison Rose Hale. It was strange how the city looked the same, even though everything inside me felt completely different. The traffic lights blinked red and green, the Charles River sparkled under the sun, college kids streamed across crosswalks with backpacks slung over their shoulders. and I sat behind the wheel gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles went white. I parked on a quiet street lined with maple trees. Carol's house was a two-story colonial with faded yellow siding and flower beds half buried under crunchy autumn leaves. My legs trembled as I climbed the front steps. Carol opened the door before I even knocked. Her eyes were rimmed with pink, but there was a softness in them I'd started to recognize as hope. "Madison," she whispered. My throat closed up. "Hey, Aunt Carol." For a moment we just stared at each other. Then she pulled me into a hug so tight it squeezed the air from my lungs. "I've waited 28 years for this," she said, her voice muffled against my hair. Inside the house smelled like cinnamon and coffee. It was filled with photos, family reunions, Christmas mornings, birthday cakes with too many candles. Faces that looked vaguely like mine smiled out from the frames. Carol led me into the living room where a man in his 40s stood up quickly from the couch. "Madison," he said, voice low and uncertain. "I'm Kevin, your uncle." I blinked at him. His hair was dark like mine, his eyes green with flecks of gold. "It's nice to meet you," I murmured. He gave a small, awkward laugh. "God, I feel like I'm meeting my niece and a stranger all at once." We sat together trying to stitch together a connection out of fragments. Carol brought out a photo album I'd already seen at the cafe, flipping through pictures of a little girl with my face and a woman who'd given me my eyes. "That's your mother, Catherine," Carol said softly, pointing to a photo of a woman in a yellow sundress, her hair rippling over her shoulders. "She used to sing 'You Are My Sunshine' to you every night." Something tugged at my memory, soft singing, a hand smoothing my hair, the scent of vanilla. My eyes filled with tears. "I wish I could remember her," I whispered. Carol reached over, squeezing my hand. "You will, bit by bit. Memory is funny like that. It comes back when you least expect it." Kevin leaned forward. "We want you to know there's no pressure. Take things as slow as you need. You've had your whole world flipped upside down." I nodded, my chest aching with too many feelings to name. Carol disappeared for a moment, returning with something small tucked under her arm. "I've been keeping this for you," she said, voice shaking. "I found it in your old bedroom after you disappeared." She held out a soft gray rabbit fur, matted, and one ear flopped sideways. Mr. Buttons. The sight of it made my breath catch. I reached out, my fingers trembling as I took the stuffed animal into my lap. The instant my skin touched the worn fabric, something burst open inside me, a flash of memory so bright it felt like lightning. My child voice shrieking, "Mr. Buttons." The rabbit clutched to my chest as a woman's laughter rang out. A sunny backyard, a swing set. My mother's perfume, vanilla and something floral. Tears poured down my cheeks as I hugged the rabbit close. Carol pressed her forehead to mine. "I never stopped believing we'd find you." That night I stayed for dinner. Kevin grilled chicken on the back porch while Carol made sweet tea. We sat around the table, stories flowing between laughter and tears. It felt both foreign and achingly familiar. Halfway through dessert, Carol handed me a small box. Inside was the silver star charm I'd seen at the cafe. "This belongs to you," she said, her eyes shining. "It always has." I clasped the star around my neck, the cool metal pressing against my skin. And for the first time in weeks, I felt something like peace. I was Olivia Monroe, and I was Madison Rose Hale. Both names belonged to me now. Both lives were written into my blood. I wasn't whole yet, but I was starting to believe I could be. It didn't take long before the police started digging deeper. Once my DNA results went public, reporters swarmed the hospital, flashing cameras in my face, shouting questions as I tried to slip out the side door in my scrubs. But beneath all the noise, the authorities uncovered something far darker. The man who'd helped the Monroes adopt me, Mark, my so-called dad's cousin, wasn't just some misguided middleman. He was tied to a network trafficking children across state lines, forging documents, selling new identities to desperate families willing to pay any price for a child. My stomach churned as detectives interviewed me in a sterile room at the precinct, asking if I remembered anyone, any faces from back then. I couldn't help them. My memories were scattered shards. But I knew one thing: I couldn't stay silent. So I started speaking publicly. Local news stations invited me to share my story, not just for the headlines, but to shine a light on how easily a child could vanish into a new life. One night, sitting under the hot glare of TV studio lights, I looked into the camera and said, "If you're watching this and you have questions about who you are, don't be afraid to search for answers. Your truth matters, and there are people who will help you find it. A few days later, a nonprofit called Children Reunited reached out. They work to reconnect missing children with their biological families and help survivors of trafficking rebuild their lives. I joined them as a volunteer. Between hospital shifts, I found myself sitting beside mothers, clutching faded photos, helping them fill out forms, comforting them as they cried. I wanted to give them what Carol had given me, a chance at truth, at healing. Because if my story could save even one other lost child, it was worth everything I'd endured. One crisp November morning, as sunlight streamed through the blinds in my tiny apartment, my phone buzzed with a message from Carol. "Call me as soon as you can. It's about your father." My breath hitched. For weeks I'd accepted the line on my birth certificate that read, "Father unknown." I'd assumed that part of my story would stay forever blank. But when I called Carol, her voice shook with excitement. "Madison, we found him." I sank onto the couch, heart thundering. My father," I stammered. "I thought Mom never told anyone who he was." Carol inhaled sharply. "She didn't tell me everything, but after you disappeared, your mom finally confided to one of her best friends in Denver. The friend reached out to me after seeing your story on the news." I closed my eyes, dizzy. "His name is Ethan Hale," Carol continued. "He lives in Vermont now. He never knew about the adoption, never knew you were taken. He thought your mom moved away and didn't want him involved." My hands were trembling so hard I nearly dropped the phone. "He's alive," I whispered. He's been out there this whole time." "Yes," Carol said gently. "And he wants to meet you, but only if you're ready." I stared out my window at the traffic rolling down Tremont Street, headlights glinting in the early sun. My whole life I'd imagined a faceless man who'd vanished before I was born. Now there was a name. A man with a life. A man who might have my eyes, my laugh. A man who'd missed decades of my birthdays without ever knowing why. I don't know what to say," I murmured. Carol's voice softened. "Take your time, sweetheart. There's no rush. But he's been looking at your photos all week. He's crying every time he sees you." Tears blurred my vision. Somewhere in Vermont, my father was waiting for a daughter he'd never even gotten to hold. And for the first time, it felt like the last hidden piece of who I was might finally be coming home. Standing on the balcony of my apartment, the wind crisp and cool against my face, I watched the city lights flicker like stars scattered across Boston's skyline. Cars moved below like tiny pulses of life. Somewhere in the distance, a siren wailed, rising and falling into the night. I wrapped my arms around myself, feeling the silver star pendant resting against my skin, a piece of my past and my future all at once. My name is Olivia Monroe, and it's also Madison Rose Hale. Both names belong to me now. Both truths coexist, tangled together in the woman I've become. I used to believe that identity was solid, something you could define in a few lines on a birth certificate or a family tree, or the stories your parents told you at bedtime. I thought the past was a fixed thing, safely locked away, never to be questioned. But I know better now. I learned that the past can surface when you least expect it, in a hospital hallway, in the trembling hands of a stranger who remembers your face, and that sometimes the family who raised you with love might also be the same people who kept secrets so deep they nearly swallowed your whole life. I learned that the truth is relentless. It doesn't wait for you to feel ready. It comes crashing in like a storm demanding to be seen. But I also learned that love is complicated, and that even those who make devastating mistakes can still love you with all their hearts. I've discovered that healing doesn't mean erasing what hurt you. It means learning how to carry it, without letting it define you completely. Meeting Carol, discovering my mother's smile in old photographs, hugging my Uncle Kevin for the first time, and now knowing there's a father waiting to meet me. All of it has rebuilt pieces of me I didn't know were missing. I'm still grieving the life I thought I had. I still wake up some nights my chest tight, wondering who I really am. But I'm also building something new, layer by layer, a life that holds space for both Olivia and Madison. And if there's one thing I want anyone listening to remember, it's this. Identity isn't just about where you come from. It's about who you choose to become. Family can be blood, or the people who show up for you when the world falls apart. And the truth, even when it shatters everything you know, can also set you free. So if you're out there questioning who you are, searching for lost pieces of yourself, don't give up. Keep looking. Keep asking. Because the truth has a way of finding you. Sometimes in the most ordinary places, on an ordinary day, when you least expect your whole world to change.